other Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years?
Too many.
Other Americans, 5. Okay, now 5 is a lot, right? I'm going to give you this credit. Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?
Counting or not counting gang violence?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We got him.
Just happened. We just found out that Charlie Kirk got shot. It's fucking awful.
Shockwaves are tearing through America as the nation grapples with the brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk, a conservative activist whose influence reached far beyond political circles. And at the heart of this story is a moment that stopped Joe Rogan dead in his tracks and changed the way people talk about political violence forever, because for a man known for always having something to say, Rogan's silence and raw reactions spoke louder than words. Now, before we dive into the shocking twists and details behind this assassination, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to break down is a story that not only reveals the terrifying state of America today, but also exposes a side of Joe Rogan that no one saw coming.
Is he dead?
That's what was just
One of the guys out there just said it was
spoken
confirmed that
in
he's
the
dead.
in the lobby was just
I've been looking. I haven't seen anything that said confirmed.
This story begins on September 10, 2025 at Utah Valley University, where Charlie Kirk, one of the most polarizing yet undeniably influential conservative figures of his generation, was addressing a crowd of thousands. Kirk was in the middle of his American comeback tour.
He's not a violent guy who's talking to people on college campuses. Wasn't even particularly rude. Who's tried to be pretty reasonable with people.
everything I saw seemed reasonable.
He's a very intelligent guy.
Yeah.
You know, whether you agree with him or don't. And there's a lot of stuff that I didn't agree with him on. That's
Sure,
fine.
sure.
You're allowed to disagree with people without
Right.
celebrating the fact they got shot.
But you can't disrespect his passion.
An ambitious campaign-style series of speeches aimed at rallying conservative students across the country in the lead-up to the 2026 midterm elections. But as Kirk sat under a white gazebo answering questions, tragedy struck. A single gunshot rang out across the quad, fired with chilling precision from a rooftop sniper position 130 meters away, piercing Kirk's neck and silencing him forever.
Disrespect his passion.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
what you're supposed to do with a guy like that, if you're opposing him, is debate him.
Right.
Have a conversation where your argument is more compelling than his.
Sure.
That's what people should be celebrating. Discourse. You know, we used to do that.
Do some homework and bring it to
Yeah.
the table.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's horrible.
In an instant, chaos consumed the campus. Students screamed, staff rushed to shield him, police helicopters circled overhead, but the assassin vanished like a ghost into the crowd, leaving only horror, confusion, and a nation already on edge wondering how far political violence had escalated. What makes this story even more haunting is the way Joe Rogan learned of Kirk's assassination in real time during a live recording of his podcast with actor Charlie Sheen. The Joe Rogan Experience is known for its unfiltered energy, heated debates, and Rogan's uncanny ability to push through even the most shocking revelations. But this was different. As the cameras rolled, a producer stepped into frame with the breaking news, and suddenly the normally talkative, unshakable Rogan was visibly rattled. His face went pale, his hands clutched his head, and his voice faltered as he asked the one question everyone at home was asking too: is he dead? When the confirmation came, the studio went silent. This was not the Joe Rogan that millions of fans were used to seeing, and that silence hit harder than any commentary he could have prepared. It was a moment that symbolized the gravity of what America had just witnessed: a powerful conservative voice gunned down in broad daylight on a college campus, and it transformed Rogan from a podcast host into an unexpected mirror of the nation's grief, fear, and uncertainty. To understand why this assassination rocked Rogan so deeply, you need to understand who Charlie Kirk was. At just 18 years old, he founded Turning Point USA, a student-focused political organization that rapidly grew into a national powerhouse shaping the voice of young conservatives. By his early 30s, Kirk had become one of Donald Trump's most trusted allies, a regular visitor to the White House, and the mastermind behind countless efforts to energize the Republican youth base. Unlike many political operatives who stayed behind the scenes, Kirk thrived on the front lines, walking into hostile environments like college campuses where he was often protested, shouted down, or even banned altogether. He was fearless, controversial, and unrelenting in his mission to reshape America's political conversation. But that same boldness made him a lightning rod for criticism. Liberals accused him of spreading conspiracy theories, particularly about the 2020 election, while progressive activists branded him as divisive and dangerous. Whether you loved him or hated him, there was no denying Charlie Kirk's presence, and that tension between admiration and hostility set the stage for the tragic scene in Utah, where admiration and anger collided in the most violent way imaginable. The assassination itself unfolded in a way that felt disturbingly cinematic, almost as if it had been planned to send a message. Roughly 3,000 students filled the quad that day, a mix of enthusiastic supporters, curious onlookers, and even a handful of protesters. Kirk, always ready for confrontation, had just been asked a pointed question about mass shootings, specifically concerning transgender perpetrators. His response was sharp, statistical, and unapologetic, as always. But before the discussion could continue, the single crack of a rifle split the air, sending Kirk collapsing forward, blood pouring from his neck. Panic erupted. Some students ducked for cover, others ran blindly in every direction, and university staff scrambled to drag Kirk from the stage even though the fatal shot had already claimed his life. Within minutes, the entire campus was locked down as law enforcement swarmed the area, helicopters circling above and terrified parents flooding the school with calls. Yet the sniper, positioned on the rooftop of the nearby Loy Center, had already vanished. That chilling precision, that ghost-like escape, left America with more questions than answers. Who planned this? Why here? And what does this mean for the future of political discourse in the United States? For Joe Rogan, those questions quickly became more than political talking points. His reaction to Kirk's death was not rooted in partisanship or ideology, it was rooted in humanity. Rogan admitted he had only met Kirk once, ironically at a gun range, but even in that brief encounter, he saw qualities that made this tragedy resonate. He described Kirk as intelligent, passionate, and surprisingly reasonable for someone constantly painted by the media as radical or extreme. Rogan stressed that while he didn't agree with many of Kirk's views, he respected his passion and the fact that he engaged with young people in open conversations. That distinction mattered, because Rogan's defense of Kirk wasn't about endorsing his politics, it was about rejecting the idea that disagreement should lead to death. His words carried the weight of someone who sits outside of the traditional political trenches, someone who commands the attention of millions who might not otherwise stop to think about what this killing truly meant. And make no mistake, what this meant was terrifying. Political violence in America has been climbing at an alarming rate, and Kirk's death was not an isolated act of madness, but part of a chilling trend. Experts have noted that the first half of 2025 alone saw nearly double the politically motivated attacks compared to 2024. Just the year before, assassination attempts on Donald Trump shook the entire nation and left his campaign under siege. In June, Minnesota's top Democratic legislator and her husband were murdered in a targeted attack that rattled both parties to their core. And just a few years earlier, Nancy Pelosi's husband was viciously attacked in their home, a moment that should have served as a wake-up call but instead faded into the endless churn of news cycles. Charlie Kirk's assassination didn't come out of nowhere. It was the latest, deadliest escalation in a pattern that shows no signs of slowing down. Rogan understood this instantly, and his warning was stark. America is teetering on the edge of something darker, and without a serious shift, political violence could spiral into open conflict. Rogan's words cut deeper because they weren't just about the assassination itself, they were about what comes next. He warned that Kirk's killing could trigger retaliation, that the anger and heartbreak of his supporters might push them over the edge, and that this cycle of violence could quickly turn America's political divisions into a full-blown civil conflict. His prediction was chilling because it rang true. Kirk had millions of followers, passionate young conservatives who looked to him as a leader, and the thought that one bullet could ignite an even greater fire was not just speculation, it was a possibility that felt all too real. This wasn't just about losing one man, it was about what his death symbolized: the erasure of dialogue, the replacement of debate with deadly force, and the transformation of political disagreements into life-or-death battles. What made Rogan's response even more important was how sharply it contrasted with much of the mainstream media coverage. While major networks dissected Kirk's controversial statements, replayed his most divisive moments, or subtly implied that he invited hostility through his rhetoric, Rogan cut through the noise with something refreshingly simple. He acknowledged the loss of a human life. He expressed disgust when an MSNBC commentator even suggested the shot might have been accidental celebratory gunfire, a narrative so absurd that it highlighted how twisted political commentary had become. Instead of spinning the tragedy for ratings or political gain, Rogan centered his reaction on what mattered most: that a 31-year-old man was dead, his voice silenced not by debate or democracy but by violence. This moment on Rogan's show became symbolic of something bigger, something America desperately needed. For decades, the country prided itself on free speech, debate, and the marketplace of ideas. Political opponents clashed in fiery debates, but at the end of the day, they went home alive. Rogan reminded his audience of that simple truth. If you oppose someone like Kirk, what you're supposed to do is debate him, challenge him, prove him wrong with better arguments. That's how you win, not by putting a bullet in his neck. These words weren't just a condemnation of Kirk's assassin, they were a plea to America to return to the basics of democracy: debate, disagreement, discourse, not death. What makes this story even more layered is the presence of Charlie Sheen during the broadcast, a man who has lived through Hollywood's political divisions, scandals, and personal battles of his own. His presence underscored the fact that this wasn't just a political story, it was cultural, it was human, and it touched people across backgrounds and industries. Rogan's reaction wasn't the voice of a politician or a pundit, it was the voice of someone millions of Americans trust to tell them the truth without an agenda. That's why this moment matters. That's why people are calling it game-changing, because it showed that even in a climate of extreme division, it's still possible to see past ideology and recognize the humanity of those we disagree with. Charlie Kirk's assassination marked a dark turning point in American politics, a moment when the violence that had been simmering on the fringes exploded into the mainstream in broad daylight in front of thousands of young people. But Joe Rogan's reaction offered a glimmer of something else, a reminder that humanity, compassion, and decency can still break through even in the darkest moments. His refusal to reduce Kirk's death to partisan theater, his insistence on acknowledging the basic injustice of celebrating political violence, and his warning that America stands on the edge of something catastrophic, all of it came together to create a moment that people will look back on as more than just a podcast clip. It was a cultural checkpoint, a chance to stop and ask ourselves, are we going to let this spiral further, or are we going to reclaim the idea that disagreement is not a death sentence? For many, Rogan's reaction wasn't just commentary, it was a lifeline, a call to remember what it means to be human in a country tearing itself apart. The only question now is whether America will listen, or whether Kirk's death will be just one more tragedy in a nation sleepwalking toward disaster.